Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Ahmed Badruddin. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Citylitics, and I have with me Rick Hugh and Jason Soza, who will be introducing themselves just shortly. Give me a second to share my screen. And so, just to kick it off, a lot of you are in the business of selling into public sector or public infrastructure markets, and procurement can somewhat feel like a black box and a lot of rules, acronyms, and processes, and doesn't always maybe line up with the way that vendors and solution providers often work. And so, uh, we're really here to help unpack that a little bit more. Procurement really is designed to make sure public money is spent responsibly and fairly, and the challenge is often knowing how to navigate that system and how without getting lost in the bureaucracy. So I'm very excited for today's conversation. We've got former chief procurement officers, and we'll be going through their backgrounds as well, but they've been at the helm of procurement within their respective states. They've overseen lots and lots of contracts and lots of different projects at RFP. So really, we'll be able to get to an insider perspective that you won't normally get by just reading an RFP. And so from a logistics perspective, if you have any questions, please submit them on the chat. And some of the high-level topics we will cover, one is demystifying procurement, really understanding how it works, why it's necessary, and why early engagement on these projects and RFPs is even more critical. How to partner with procurement and offices and with end customers, how to shape the conversation, how to provide that expertise in that stage, and then how to also build long-term relationships and be a great partner with end customers and procurement offices. Just a quick background on Citylitics. We are a data and intelligence company. We essentially use artificial intelligence to look for signals of future infrastructure projects. And so a lot of our customers that range from manufacturers, suppliers, engineering, construction firms, and various infrastructure verticals use our platform to identify opportunities at the early stages and help pre-position and shape the future project and grow their business and sales pipeline with greater efficiency. And then I'll pass it on to Rick and Jason if you want to speak a little bit about gov sourcing.
Sure. I'll let you do that, Jason.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, gov sourcing. We're a company formed of former chief procurement officers like Rick and I. We have some former chief information officers and some former chief administrative officers. So those that oversaw, IT and procurement and fleet facilities, things like that, all at the state level. So I'm here in Alaska. I was the chief procurement officer for the state of Alaska for 6 years. Before that, I was a procurement practitioner. So I was the procurement officer of record. I was the person that was in charge of the black box that, took in all of the proposals. I did my best to think I was being communicative with everybody, but, took in all the proposals. There was that waiting period. And then at some point we announced who the winners were. So yeah, now in this current role, we work directly with suppliers helping them work with government. So, between the team that we have, Rick will introduce himself. He has way more history than I do and much more varied. We help them kind of understand those we try to basically what we're going to talk about today, demystify the black box. Or demystify procurement and what everything, all the circumstances and variables and everything that go into that black box. So happy to be here, and I'll turn it over to Rick to tell about his experience.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Good afternoon, everyone. Rick Hughes. I have been with GovSourcing since 2022. Prior to that, I was a procurement leader in 3 different states, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Arizona. I too, in my early days in Illinois government, I did actually, I was a practitioner. I actually, issued some RFPs and managed the award and the protest process and all of that. When I went to government in Illinois, I had a private sector career where I was a accountant and a lawyer, and I handled financial and legal matters with large and small organizations. And when I was asked to be in Illinois procurement office, it was supposed to be just for maybe a couple of years, try to help them transform some things. And I found myself really sort of falling in love with the challenges and the people that do the work and the issues that arise, and just stayed with it and the rest of my working career, and then joined Gov Sourcing in 2022. Looking forward to sharing knowledge and ideas with the group today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. And Jason, anything else you want to call out on your background before we move on?
Oh, I mean, like Rick, 21 years I have in public procurement. I've been with Gov Sourcing now for coming up on 6. I was also very heavily involved, like Rick, with the National Association of State Procurement Officials. So both of us have a lot of experience at a national level, hearing and interacting with other CPOs across the country. And I believe Rick also holds a CPPO certification like me, which is a professional level public procurement certification. So yeah, I also have my Six Sigma black belt. I do like that that's in the bio, because that was a very hard-earned certification. I have so much respect for anybody who's gotten to that master black belt level. That's like on my horizon. But yeah, I love process improvement, love anything that we can do to help make either government more efficient in the procurement process, or help suppliers responding to RFPs, how they can be more efficient in their response process. So yeah, thanks for that opportunity.
Thank you both. Wonderful. Let me get away from the slides. And we'd love to just kick it off. I don't know how many of the folks who joined this webinar have even interacted with a chief procurement officer, or, because oftentimes they're working with the end customer, let's say the public works director or the superintendent or whatnot. So let's kick it off by each of you, if you could tell us from your perspective, what does a chief procurement officer do? What is the day-to-day like?
I can say, I mean, from my perspective, that is very true. Procurement tends to fall into the background. We're much more of an internal process when it comes to a supplier working with an agency. So they find somebody that wants their product or is interested in their product or service, whatever. Now that person has to think, okay, I can't just buy this because it's public money. We have to go through a fair, open, competitive process. Now they have to go and check with their internal procurement resource, and that would be our office or somebody connected to our office. So when Rick and I were buyers, that would be us directly. We'd get a question, hey, I'm really interested in this product, can I just go and buy it? Well, how much is it going to cost? What is it? Like we'd have to go through this checklist of items. As chief procurement officer, we're overseeing, those buyers and the processes. One of my very explicit job duties in Alaska's laws is the chief procurement officer oversees and manages our procurement code. So the set of laws that determine how things are bought by the state. So we're kind of behind the curtain in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, Rick, do you have anything?
Yeah, I would say it's true that we're a little bit behind the scenes to the supplier community, very much, active in sort of the leadership of the agency, and maybe interaction with the governor's office about policies. And then, there's sort of the broader sort of governor's agenda items that get handed to us through our executive leader at typically Department of Administration Services is where the CPO resides. And sometimes it's called Central Management Services, but it's an administrative office that I always like to coin it as it's the business office of government. And so the procurement office is typically there, and with a lot of functions, that are typical of private sector enterprises: HR, benefits, accounting, risk management, treasury operations, budget, all of that stuff usually is in. So we're one of the, and so we regularly interact with those functional leaders at the Department of Administration. And one of the things that was a little unique about my background with Wisconsin, I also had oversight authority not on just state executive agencies, but also higher ed, which in most places, higher ed is independent from the executive branch of state government. But in Wisconsin, I had oversight over higher ed, and like Jason said, it was our duties to carry out the rules and regulations and make sure the community, and when I say community, that meant staff and supervisors of buyers, to understand what the rules were. And we usually were also responsible for professional development of procurement practitioners throughout the state. So our office usually was responsible for developing the materials that upskilled the junior associates that were just joining, and also tried to refresh the senior practitioners. So there's a lot of responsibility. We were grossly underpaid for the responsibilities that we had compared to private sector, peers. But it was a job that Jason and I both really liked doing when we were in it.
No, appreciate you sharing that. And it sounds like there's a lot of being part of the process of getting some of these RFPs approved, but also setting these rules and regulations and guidelines for procurement within those states. And between the two of you, there's probably 4 or 5 states that you covered over the years. What goes into creating those rules? And how do they vary from state to state?
Yeah, you want me to take a shot at that first, Jason?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
I mean, like there's like 2 creations, I would say. One are the statutes, which are done by our elected officials, and they pass laws, and sometimes states try to imitate each other with the laws, and so the legislature creates the laws, and then we sometimes have an opportunity to influence how those laws are interpreted with the rules. And to be honest with you, for a lot of good reasons, it doesn't change a lot. There's a lot of stuff that's introduced every year by legislators, and then the procurement office, with often the help of the budget or the government relations people, are trying to maintain a certain amount of consistency and not too much change too quickly, because that sort of creates even more mystery and more uncertainty for the people who want to do business. And earlier when I talked about being responsible for making sure the community understands, that does include the supplier community. And we did put out, it wasn't always easy for people to do this, but we did put out communications that tried to make doing business with the government agency a little more easy and understandable. But it was one of many tasks, and sometimes it was down the list.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Is there a specific example of a law that was introduced that changed, called the procurement, and something maybe the supply community wasn't aware of or should be aware of at that time?
I will say for Alaska anyways, it sometimes was the supplier community that would push for a change. And one that comes to mind in procurement, you can often find it, depending on the state, preferences for a certain group of qualifying suppliers, right? We had one for Alaska veterans. So it was very specific, but it was driven by a supplier. It came as maybe as a surprise to other suppliers when it was passed, right? That this was out there. But, it came up from a supplier to their legislator who drafted a bill, got support for it, ran it through the entire process, and then it became law. And it became my job as chief procurement officer to implement it, to figure out how to actually operationalize this law. And that's how a lot of things kind of happened. It was our job, Rick alluded to it earlier, is our job to kind of enact socioeconomic goals, whether it's coming from the governor's office or a legislator, a constituent. A lot of things that we would try to fight off would be things like where one supplier didn't win, right? And they may be really well connected. They complain about that to their legislator. I would get called over to talk about it, and they would ask me, well, what law do we have to pass to make sure that my constituent wins next time? It's like, no. That's not what we're here to do. We can educate, we can try to help that supplier learn how to do business with our state better, but that I understand that as a legislator, you want to pass laws. That's your job. But that's not how this works. So yeah, those kinds of changes can come in a number of ways. There's usually a protest process for procurements. If you're not happy with the outcome and you think that there's a reason why you can argue that there was a problem with the process, you can file a protest. Sometimes those result in changes to law because it highlights a flaw or a defect or something in our process. So yeah, Rick, other ways or any surprising procurement laws that ever landed on your?
I mean, in recent, one of the things I would say sort of overarching is we talked about these legislators that are responsible for the laws. Sometimes they come into government, very ambitious to make change. And a lot of times their background is not all that conducive to understanding that in most cases, like when you're in state government, especially in smaller states, state government is the largest employer. It's a complex business. It really is. And some lawmakers come from smaller businesses. They come from family-owned businesses. And so their intentions to make change sometimes really are kind of misaligned with government's sort of sophisticated size and status, if you will. So like Jason said, there are regularly small business incentives, to try to give more business to small business, more state business to small business. And that's all great. I worked in several initiatives where that was wonderful. And a lot of the sort of longtime practitioners thought, well, if the small business becomes our customer, the prices are going to go up. That's not always the case. Before I came into government, I worked in big corporate America, and I'll tell you, there was a lot of inefficiencies there. So, but the small business sort of initiatives should be sort of tailored and targeted for things that are realistically doable by small business. And a lot of times that means, maybe regionalizing or cutting the big apple of the government's sort of need into smaller pieces regionally, so smaller businesses are capable of doing it. But there are certain categories of services that are conducive to small business.
What would you advise vendor solution providers in terms of how to track and understand these procurement laws and how they're changing or might be changing?
It's tough. I mean, we always used to joke, as part of the NASPO, or the National Association of State Procurement Officials, that there are 52 states and territories in the U.S., and we're all friends, but we have 52 different ways of doing everything. So it can be difficult to keep tabs on how to do things where. There are certainly companies like us that can help with that. government sourcing solutions that can help with that. Honestly, too, like with the advent of things like ChatGPT and AI, that makes keeping track of things a lot easier too. I mean, you could get a pretty good head start by saying, hey, tell me the highlight across all 52 states and territories differences in procurement policies, insights. I mean, use that as a prompt and kind of refine from there. Absent that, yeah, it really would be diving into each, and even so, that's at a state level, 52 different states and territories. As you get down into counties, cities, school districts, higher ed, now you have tens of thousands of different ways to do things. So yeah, it's really, I would say, like, if you're a supplier looking to do business with government, to Rick's point, if you're a small business, start there, start local, start with, your local city, county, township, whatever, school district, wherever you're trying to sell into. Learn, educate yourself about the ins and outs of doing business there, and then start expanding. If you're looking bigger, then yeah, dive in and learn which states have preferences. In Alaska, there's a whole set of preferences. Other states have none. Some states have protest procedures. Other states have none. So really learn the ins and outs, learn about cooperative contracting. That's a big deal too. Can one contract cover a, larger area instead of having to go after several different contracts or compete every time? So things like that. But yeah, it can feel like a daunting task knowing that you have procurement is complicated enough as it is, but to know that there are very different ways to complicate it across thousands of different places that you might want to do business with can feel very daunting, but bite-sized pieces.
Any examples of how you've seen some companies do it effectively when they have to work so many different jurisdictions, so many different, permutations of procurement laws?
Yeah, one of the things prior to my government experience, I worked in big corporate America, big Fortune 100, 500 companies. And in those places, we had a government affairs office, that tracked legislation and that sort of thing. And one of the things I'd add as a little tip to the audience, if you're in a business that is represented by a trade associations, and typically you are, depending on how large that trade association is, I mean, there's usually somebody, monitoring things, but it's not easy monitoring things across 50 states. I worked for Motorola, and we had all sorts of interest in a lot of states. I worked for IBM, same thing, and the government relations office, had a pretty good sized team. And that's just not really possible the smaller you are. But the trade associations, especially at the local level, Chamber of Commerce, sometimes at the local level, will have a committee that tracks current things, and that's a place for you to get some information.
Sure.
And back to what Jason said, it is a lot easier now with AI to get information on these things. So
yeah.
One other resource that Rick just reminded me of, PTACs, so Procurement Technical Assistance Centers. If you're a small business, typically you can find a PTAC at a university or just somewhere in your state should have a PTAC that's designed specifically to help small businesses learn how to interact with government.
Got it. You mentioned cooperative purchasing agreements, and I was wondering if we could do a bit of a one-on-one on the different types of contracts, so formal RFPs, sole source, cooperative purchase agreements. Just a bit of a one-on-one on what are the different types of contracts, when is one more applicable than the other, and what does a supplier need to know about those contract types?
Yeah, I can start there, Rick, if you want. Yeah, so procurement laws, rules, ordinances, whatever you want to call it, your different levels are typically designed to encourage the most competitive types of procurements first.
Mm.
And then
Yeah.
anything else is going to require some level of approval or a waiver process or whatever. So least restrictive, we all are familiar and have heard horror stories about sole source procurements, right? So that's the least, I said least restrictive, least competitive type of procurement is a sole source. So that's somebody making a case that this vendor is the only vendor that can meet our needs at government. For us in procurement, that gives us heartburn. We know that there's usually competition for anything. So that argument needs to be really good. A lot of times when you see sole source, non-competitive award hit the news, I would bet that 9 times out of 10 procurement wasn't directly involved in it, or we were bypassed. So I'll just throw that out there. Anyways, that's the most least competitive type of procurement. And so usually has to go through the most hoops to get there. Then you start getting a lot of times based on dollar value. As the dollar value increases, the amount of competition you need to seek goes up as well. So a lot of states, a lot of places will have what's called a micro purchase or reasonable and adequate purchase level, under which, it might be $3,000, $5,000, $10,000. Somewhere under there, you can just go out and say, look, I'm going to buy this thing. It makes the most sense to buy it from this place, because doing a formal RFP for $3,000, it's a waste of resources. So we're going to do that. Then you get into, something like 3 bids. You need to go out and get 3 bids to buy something that costs $25,000. It's a lot like spending your own money. You're going to shop around a little bit more as the value goes up. Places will have a formal procurement threshold where you need to issue an invitation to bid. There are all sorts of names for it: an ITB, an IFB, an invitation for bid. In Canada, our friends in Canada, tenders, the more international terms are going to be tenders, or a request for proposals. So that is going to be the most complex, the most competitive type of procurement that's out there, and is going to require the most resources from a supplier to respond. Now, if you get the state of Alaska and the state of Washington and the state of Oregon all agree, hey, we all need the same thing. We want to combine our spending power and go out and buy something together. That's where you get into that cooperative contracting territory. And you combine resources. Maybe Alaska leads it, but we combine, Alaska, Washington and Oregon's needs in there. And now we've aggregated and hopefully are leveraging that for better pricing in terms of conditions. And also on the supplier side, they only have to deal with one RFP to get to 3 states. They don't have to deal with 3 different ones. And you expand that out, we have nationwide cooperative contracting organizations like Nashville Value Point. Rick and I are both we served on that management board. Omnia, Sourcewell, E&I in the higher ed world. There are these national ones that try to combine, nationwide need into single contracts. So if you're a supplier and you get one of those contracts, you can now go to every single state entity, any SLED entity really, and say, hey, we hold this contract. Are you able to leverage that instead of going out with an RFP? So that's kind of in a nutshell.
Those ones. And then, to your point around sole sourcing, because I know that's often the objective a lot of our customers have is they want to get it earlier and they want to try to ideally be the sole source, but, or shape the RFP in a way. There's this trade-off here, right? With to your point, making sure the public dollars are being spent the most effectively versus, efficient solutions and whatnot. What have you seen as good arguments and bad arguments for sole sourcing?
Well, it's hard for a procurement person to say what the good arguments are, because we don't want to necessarily taint the community with good ideas to get sole sources, because generally we don't think it's good policy. We don't think it's good practice. But some of the things that, and the thing about sole source is, yeah, a lot of people like the idea of it, but when the procurement people sort of stop it from happening, there's 4 people that are happy that we stopped it, because they think they have a they also have an offering. So that's one of the reasons why we sort of are opposed to the practice and the policy. We definitely are opposed to like politically connected suppliers trying to have an edge, because that's not good. That's not good for the system. It's not good for the community, taxpayers. It's just not good. So I mean, some of the arguments that are made is that it truly is, for some proprietary reason, it really is the solution. For example, there's some cases where the maintenance and support for certain products really is only done by the company that sort of has that product out there. That evolves where other businesses get involved. Sometimes it's in the best interest of that proprietary firm to have other people doing the maintenance, because then they can expand their innovation and research and development for new things. So sometimes it's a matter of continuing the course with an existing source, because it's an urgent need for the government, that a sole source for an additional 12 months or 24 months until a new solicitation can be developed and awarded. Sometimes that's a really good reason to do a sole source, because the contract's about to expire. Government allows itself to get into this spot often because the procurement resources are so thinly staffed in places.
Yeah.
And so you can't get a new contract awarded before the current one expires. So that's a justification for a sole source with the current incumbent. So that's some
Makes sense.
example. I don't know if Jason wants to elaborate on any others.
I think you mentioned it to a point there that, there might be a situation where you have the thing that comes to mind is like a very specific brand of like machinery. We often dealt with Alaska Marine Highway System here. We have ships, ferries that are built by a specific shipbuilder. And if, 20 years down the line, we need maintenance on that, they're really the only ones that, like, truly the only ones who can do it. Like, that is a pure sole source type of situation that comes to mind for me. You might run into it with like parts of a building, that are very specialized machinery or something like that, where the part literally can only come from one supplier. That's kind of the most applicable type of sole source I can think of.
Okay, no, appreciate that. And as you've been working with vendors, solution providers, what are the top, call it, couple things you find they most misunderstand about procurement?
Oh, the top ones. One, maybe this isn't so much a misunderstanding as just maybe a root of misunderstanding. I have observed a lot of times where the information is there. There's an RFP or an ITB or whatever it is that is calling for responses is out there, and it's just not read thoroughly. Everything that needs to happen to submit a response is in there, and we'll get a late response. We have to kick it out. We'll get a response that missed attachment H, and we have to kick it out. And it does feel a little silly at times to say, I'm sorry you missed this, but that's and maybe that's the misunderstanding is thinking that, if I don't fill in this blank, it's probably not a big deal. Like making that assumption that it's not a big deal. when in fact, for
Uh-huh.
us on the government side, in order to treat everybody fairly, in order to maintain the level playing field and be transparent, we do have to treat everybody the same. So if we said this, you have to fill in this blank, it's mandatory, and we get 3 suppliers that do it and the 4th one doesn't, we have to kick that 4th one out, and they may not understand why that is. And so really it's reading the documentation that's out there. And maybe it's also a misunderstanding to think that you can't talk to the procurement officer. You can ask questions,
Okay,
especially if
interesting.
they're simple questions like that. Like, hey, it says here blank. Do I have to put something in there, or can I leave it blank? Those kinds of questions can be asked and answered. And I always encourage that. I mean, it helps us highlight flaws or places we missed in our communication, and helps the vendor community. Maybe it's something we need to issue out an amendment to that solicitation to everybody. Rick, I'm sure you have some.
Well, what I would say, one of the misunderstandings is how much procrastination can hurt you. Just as simple as that. And, and we have clients that, we see the reality sometimes. There's 4 or 5 solicitations out there around the country, all with due dates in a pretty short window of time. And these things take time. And, they're pretty well positioned and understanding, and they just gear down, but they start early. They, typically the solicitation period, the advertisement period is like 2 weeks. Sometimes it's only a week. And if you see something and it's got a week deadline, you should start preparing your response right away. I think, sometimes when it's a little more complicated, the schedule is maybe 6 weeks or 2 months. But here's what happens in government. When the procurement office is telling the agency that you need to give time for suppliers to respond, the agency is saying, but we have funds that are going to expire if we don't get this awarded by a certain date. So sometimes they're pushing for an accelerated response time. And I've said this many times. Well, you might end up only getting one response, and it might not be the response you were hoping for because you're not giving it sufficient time. So I would say that timing and the sort of the theme that you led off with about getting involved early, when it's a solicitation that's published that you know about, take a look at it and actually start drafting your response as soon as you can, like day one. And what helps, so often the response deadline is a certain date, but there's an earlier date for questions and answers. And so when you start to draft, you immediately start to come up with some really good questions. What sometimes happens is companies wait until the day before the questions are due.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to get the questions articulated in time to get answers. And a lot of times the answers are not that good, but sometimes the answers are not that good because the question wasn't well thought out. And so a lot of times government will say, well, see section 3.45. Sometimes that's a result of a couple of things. One is they got a lot of questions to answer and they didn't give themselves enough time because there was pressure to get it done back, in that tighter time frame that some agency is looking for. Or it's just that, well, they got overwhelmed with questions. And so if they've got a question that, people didn't really take much time looking at the document, it's explained somewhere else, that's all they're going to say.
Yeah. It's interesting because
I was just going to add a fun fact, and it's not a misunderstanding, but maybe just something suppliers don't know about the procurement process. And especially, I mean, to Rick's point, one, if there's an existing contract, you can usually find out like when that deadline is and start preparing before the solicitation even comes out. And two, in almost all cases, a lot of procurement information is public information. So you can ask, hey, can I see the procurement file for the last solicitation, which, like for Alaska, included the winning proposal, which would include pricing, anything that was, evaluated would all be in there. and you could look at that and kind of get a head start on what your own response might look like. So
Okay, no, that's yeah, and we see this a lot too, where it's the scramble to respond to the RFP, and the earlier the more prep the company is, the more likely they are to succeed. And you mentioned something is interesting where there's another stage where they can ask questions. So I guess one thing I was wondering if you can take a step back and what are the different steps and how should companies, what should their ideal response process be for what you've observed? You know, for example, prep, set up the questions, you know,
yeah.
to give yourself the couple weeks to respond.
Yeah, it's like you know, give yourself time to review, do a quality review, because sometimes what we do is we've looked at proposals from clients or prospective clients. We've offered to look at proposals, and you know, I got to tell you, a number of times they don't give us much time to look at it, so that's a disadvantage. But so it's that review process in advance of the due date. And the other thing is, you know, all these jurisdictions have technology systems. Some are more user friendly than others. If the government has a system that you've never submitted a response to or within, give yourself time, because what happens on the last day is this help desk gets flooded with calls from people, and you know, you might run the risk of not getting the help you needed. And late bids, unless the government is definitely clearly not lived up to its duties, a late bid is disqualified. And proving that the government didn't live up to its duties is really hard. And you're never going to win saying, well, the help desk, I called the help desk at 3, the bids weren't due till 5, and they didn't get back to me to 4:55, and in the process of submitting, the system froze up on me. That's not going to win.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's great reinforcement of early engagement, being prepped. Sorry, Jason, you're going to say something?
Oh, if you see in the RFP or the ITB something called a pre-bid conference or a pre-proposal conference, attend that, like always.
Okay.
That's I always saw that as our only chance in this process. So, you know, once you enter this RFP or a solicitation process, once you enter that process, you're kind of kept from interacting with suppliers. You know, you don't want to be seen as bias towards any particular supplier. Like I don't even want to, you know, take phone calls from suppliers that are calling. But if you see a pre-bid or a pre-proposal, that's our chance to interact with the industry during the solicitation process. Sometimes suppliers get on and they're just quiet. They just want to listen and hear what everybody else says, because they don't want to, you know, give away any secrets. But really, that's your chance. That's your best chance during a procurement to influence the process. If there's something that seems overly restrictive, ask about it. Can it be changed? Why is it there? You know, we see, and a lot of times, you know, if there's a minimum requirement that you've had to have performed this service for the previous 5 years, that came out of nowhere. That's an arbitrary number that somebody said, that sounds good, you know. And if you can make a case, hey, you know, we see that this says 5 years as a minimum requirement. This is a very new industry. There aren't a lot of suppliers that have 5 years of experience. If you reduce it to 3, you'll increase your competitive pool and have better response. It's hard for a government to deny that, you know, or to justify keeping it at 5. So, I mean, those kinds of questions, it never hurts to ask. And, you know, it always bugged me when we had suppliers get on and just listen, because that was as much their opportunity to, you know, kind of shape the resulting solicitation as ours. Yeah.
And usually it's one pre-bid meeting and everyone comes in, and so okay, got it.
And so on that point though, some pre-bid conferences are mandatory and some aren't. Generally, our view is mandatory, you should try to avoid, because you might end up leaving someone out. Someone might get sick, someone, may be flying in and their flight's delayed, and then they don't attend. So typically a mandatory conference, it's becoming less used than in the past, because there were like some bad consequences. But if it says mandatory, you gotta attend if you want.
have to be part of it.
Well, and yeah, a lot of times you see mandatory on facilities type stuff, because it, to access a building at a certain time and date, it requires a lot of coordination. And so if you're going to do a walkthrough, be there on that walkthrough, because there's not going to be another chance. That's usually where we saw the mandatory ones. But yeah, otherwise they typically, unless there's a really good reason for it, it's just another reason to, it becomes another point at which people can be thrown out for not a very good reason.
Yeah. So what have you found in this, call it pre-bid stage or early stages, in terms of good examples of a sales professional being helpful, collaborative, really working well in the eyes of a procurement team towards the upcoming RFP?
So I'll start on that one, just because it's easy for me, really, in a way. It's like, don't be too focused on your own personal goals. Don't be thinking about your commission down the road. Don't be thinking about even your company so much. Come to the discussion as a person who understands the industry and the government need. If you have some good success in a comparable government, that's good. That's a good story. But I think the attitude is, you want to be on a longer term relationship basis. You want to be a problem solver. You want to help government improve its operations. And so that's what the focus should be, is how can government improve its operations, and how what is it that I can say, or what is it that my company does that helps in that regard, without making it a pitch. Make it more sort of case study, independent authority type knowledge, and less sort of individually focused.
Is there any, maybe from an anecdote, a certain profession that really stood out, where they engaged with you early on and was really partnering, sharing expertise?
Yeah, I was going to say, to tag on to that, maybe a misunderstanding is procurement. We don't actually buy anything for ourselves, other than like an e-procurement system, office supplies, things like that. But, having somebody who sells, for us, like a crime lab DNA sequencer, walking into my office and trying to pitch me, we don't buy it. Like that desire to buy that thing comes from the crime lab, not from us, So that's the number of sales professionals that have walked in my door over the years, hundreds. I don't remember most of them, especially if they came in. I remember the ones that came in and were very disappointed that they weren't walking out with a signed contract. It's like, that's not what we do. Let's start from square one. I don't remember any of those like specifically, but the best ones I'm still friends with to this day, because they came in and it was, to Rick's point, never about, hey, this is what we do, this is what I want to sell you, this is what I want you to buy from us. It was, the conversations were always like, I know how procurement works. They did their homework. I know how procurement works. I know I'm not gonna like walk out of here with a contract today. Can you just tell me what's going on? Like what are challenges you're seeing? What are things you want to get done? What are you hearing from agencies? Very open conversations. And they were very pleasant, and they were, you know, the ones I am still friends with to this day were very much interested in the success of the state of Alaska. And even in my own personal, you know, hey, you know, it would be, you're doing great, you know, how can we support you, you know, in what you want to do outside of the state, you know? I mean, and so I mean that's really cool. You know, and keeping that very, you know, I feel like the sales professionals who are in it for the right reasons, to Rick's point.
The genuine relationship.
Yes, they're the ones that stand out. They're the ones you never feel like it. I mean, the ones I remember, one of them that I'm I consider a friend, I can reach out to anytime, never bought a thing from him. I mean, that's the thing. Like we never actually engaged in any purchase, and that was fine. You know, it was all about what he could do for the state. And you know, Rick, did you have any?
Yeah, so Rick, any examples from your end?
Well, I think part of it is an experience thing. You know, larger companies, I think, do a pretty good job developing their sales professionals about this, you know, about the you know, the differences between public and private. You know, in public, you know, things take time. It's not, I mean, in the big corporate America, it takes time too. I mean, they're very bureaucratic too. The one difference between the private sector and the public sector that I think is beautiful is that in the private sector, if you bid on a financial accounting system and you don't win, nobody has any duty or obligation to tell you why. Yeah. Now, maybe some companies take that on. My general understanding is they don't take that on. They never get a word. With government, you know, there is a certain obligation. You know, we have to produce the process. We have to show the process. You're entitled. If you participate and you didn't win, you get a chance to review things, you know, and that's, I know I'm getting away from your original question from the sales, but it seems like the salespeople from larger organizations get some development, and they have that understanding that nothing happens the day I walk in the office, like it might happen in some smaller businesses. It just doesn't go that quickly. It's a longer term relationship. The one thing good about government as a customer, and we haven't had to deal with this too much in recent years, but there's been a couple of slow cycles. Government, their budgets aren't as healthy now as they were a few years ago, but in recession and slow times, government does have needs and they do spend money on those needs. Mm-hmm. And so they're a good customer. A lot of companies that do business in both public and private kind of describe their government business as sort of the cash cow. It's less volatile, but it also takes time to build the pipeline.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And then just on this relationship topic, because I think it's the industry is very relationship driven. Any other words of wisdom or tips that you would share with sales professionals around how to build lasting, genuine relationships with procurement and customers? Just to close out the loop on that topic.
I think it's really doing your homework beforehand, and you know, don't walk into a procurement person's office and ask how the procurement process works. Like that's all available. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of places will have a published website, like how to do business with, you know, blank, the state of Alaska, the city of Tampa. Give that a read, you know, take a look at it before engaging. And that way you're asking questions that are, you know, not covered there, that are actual like gaps in your knowledge. Ask exploratory questions, you know, get to know the layout, the budget cycles, you know, budget forecasts, things like that. Know the difference between, you know, procurement. We don't buy things. We run the process, but we don't actually buy the things. Your end user is going to be the one to talk about technical specs, you know, and like why you're different or new or a disruptor in your industry. And then, if you're talking to that end user and you can inform them, or more about the procurement process, their own procurement process than they do, you can help guide them on their next steps. Like, oh, you're interested, cool. I talked to so-and-so in your procurement office, or, since this is going to be over 50,000, it's going to be, need to go through this process. You can really come across as a resource to them for procurement. And then on the procurement side, you can come across as a resource in your industry.
Yeah, I would say that, like Jason said, these documents about how to do business with us, that's like a development that's gotten refined over the last 15 years, probably. And some places are better than others. But if you can see who the author of those documents are, a lot of times it's kind of ghost, and you can't see. But if you can see who's doing that, a lot of times those people, that's really more of their job, is to do the supplier outreach. Those are really good people because they understand, they're good communicators. And procurement offices that invest in those kinds of operations do it for a good reason. I wanted to have more suppliers bidding on our stuff. Or if we did have some special need, I wanted to have a big directory of those special needs suppliers in our system that were registered. So I think that's really good.
Yeah, no, helpful. And I think we're running towards the end of time, and I fortunately couldn't get to all the things that I wanted to cover. I think you guys covered a lot of rich content, but kind of want to close it off with maybe one practical takeaway for a sales professional in terms of working with procurement from things that we've talked about, and each of you could provide that, and that'll be extremely helpful.
I thought about this before the call. I know some of the people in the audience do a lot of construction type projects. And so here's one thing. If you've got a contract already in place and you're discovering an opportunity maybe for I'm going to call it a new expansion of that contract, a change order. I've seen this happen a few times. You got a good pitch. The person who's overseeing the job, supervising it, they say, oh yes, we'll take that too. That sounds great. Make sure the person that you're selling to has the authority to approve a change order of that magnitude, because I've seen it a number of times where the company did the work and they don't get paid because the person who authorized the work, who gave the okay, wasn't the right person. And the state said, that was unauthorized. We're not going to pay that. So that's one thing to think about. Make sure that you understand the authority of the people that you're getting change orders from.
Makes sense. Jason, any?
I would say, just keep in mind that public sector is public. Most things that you wonder about, you might be able to just ask and get, passed. We had, requests for like every proposal that was submitted in response to an RFP, not just the winning one, but all of them, everything that we had. Okay, yeah, we can provide that. You can talk to a procurement officer and ask about the process. A lot of stuff is public. So if you have a doubt about whether you can have access to something, get something, never hurts to ask. I would always lean towards asking rather than assuming or just going without.
Appreciate it. Good one. Jason, Rick, very much appreciated. I think it was incredibly valuable for sales professionals. Appreciate you sharing the time. Any takeaways for anyone who wants to talk to you or gov sourcing or learn more? Where should they go?
I think our contact information is out there, maybe on the webinar, or will be out there. But if you head to govsourcing.com, you can find ways to reach out to us. LinkedIn actually is probably the one of the best ways to find either Rick or I or anybody from our team. Yep, there we are.
This I will leave the emails up there. Thank you again, Rick, Jason, and thanks everyone for joining today's webinar.
Awesome.
Thank you
Thanks
so
so much.
much.
Take care.